Welcome to Distress to Joyful, Bailey's Way. I'm your host, Bailey Reber, here to enlighten you and the rest of the world about one of the most misunderstood mental health disorders out there, bipolar disorder. In each episode, we'll learn more about my personal journey with bipolar II disorder, how I've struggled with it, and how I've learned to overcome those struggles. Together, we'll laugh, we'll cry, and most importantly, we'll have fun. You'll leave each episode feeling hopeful and stocked full of useful information on how you can better yourself and the world around you. Hello, friends. It has been a long time. I don't even know if I need to apologize at this point, considering what I said last episode. But I'm really happy to be back, and I finally have some time to sit behind the mic and also, more importantly, to do research for the episode for today. So real quick, those of you guys on YouTube, I am actually using my phone to record the video this time instead. Typically, I use my laptop. So we'll see if the quality is any better, and hopefully you guys can actually see all of me right now. I set all this up myself, so if you only see half my face, we'll find out when I'm done talking, and it is what it is. Okay, so as for announcements, I don't know that I have any specific, to be honest. I've had a lot going on in life lately. I entered into two different fashion competitions, actually, since y'all last heard from me. I'll tell y'all more about that in Win of the Week. I finished up school for the semester. My husband and I have been traveling quite a bit. We have so much travel planned for July. So I am going to work really, really hard to get some episodes pre-recorded so that you guys don't have to go another month without me being here. I'm doing my best, but with May being Mental Health Awareness Month, I did not show up at all for this podcast, which is actually terrible for my branding if you think about it. But I was actually showing up for me, and that's what I really needed to do. I am super, super proud of myself about how I've handled this year. This year has been super stressful, just like last year. But the difference is I have been able to keep a workout routine steady and also really focus and pay attention to eating more healthy. I, slipped. I think I talked about this recently. I gained some weight back, and that has sucked, and it's not been fun. But that's mainly because I just stopped trying to do good for myself. I stopped eating lots of fruits and veggies. I started eating more garbage. And this year I've been really focusing on eating less garbage, just intermittently when I can, because, we cannot fully get rid of garbage these days. It's just everywhere. But I am really, really focusing on cooking at home more, eating more clean, eating more healthy, and I'm feeling a lot better. So even on the shitty days, I'm still much better than the shitty days last year. Which is great, but that's why I went a bit MIA. I have taken on a lot, which is a problem of mine that I still have not been able to resolve. I don't know if I'm going to be able to resolve that anytime soon. But that said, thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing to tune into this show episode after episode. I really appreciate y'all, and I really hope that y'all are getting some good things out of this. That's the whole point of me doing this, and so I hope that it's what you guys need it to be. And if not, dude, send me a DM on Instagram and tell me. I would be happy to cover whatever topic you are curious about, or if you have questions about bipolar disorder, specifically to what I've been through, whatever. I'm an open book for y'all. And speaking of open book for y'all, let's go ahead and talk about today's episode. But before we dive into the episode, I do want to let y'all know that I've been seeing a therapist for 12 and a half years now. And it has been a journey. So as I'm sure you've already read, that the title of this episode is Therapy Unveiled, My Personal Journey, Vulnerable Moments, and How to Make Therapy Work for You. So that said, we are going to go into all of the details of my journey with therapy within this episode. But before we do that, let's go ahead and define therapy, like what actually is therapy and what its purpose is. So let's start with that. So the actual term is psychotherapy. That's what it is supposed to be called. That's the medical terminology. But most people, especially people like you and me, we just call it therapy, or sometimes you'll hear the term talk therapy. All three of those are talking about the same damn thing. So, the National Institute of Mental Health defines psychotherapy as a variety of treatments that aim to help a person identify and change troubling emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. Most psychotherapy takes place one-on-one with a licensed mental health professional or with other patients in a group setting. In general, the goals of psychotherapy are to gain relief from symptoms, maintain or enhance daily functioning, and improve quality of life. So, why would someone seek therapy? We talk about therapy more and more these days. It has definitely become less stigmatized. But y'all, I said I've been in therapy for 12 and a half years. When I started therapy, it was not what people did. We didn't talk about it. It was hush hush. My family was ashamed that I was going. We'll get to that later. But why would we seek it? I feel like we all talk about it, but why are we going? So, there are a number of reasons, but I'm going to go ahead and list a few of them that are discussed on the National Institute of Mental Health's website, which you can find the link to this webpage in the show notes, so don't miss out on that. So these reasons include dealing with severe or long-term stress from a job or a family situation, the loss of a loved one, that's a big one, or relationship or family problems, another big one. So having symptoms with no physical explanation, such as changes in sleep or appetite, low energy, lack of interest or pleasure in activities that you once enjoyed, persistent irritability, excessive worry, or a sense of discouragement or hopelessness that won't go away. A healthcare provider suspects that you have a mental health diagnosis, or they diagnose you with a mental health diagnosis. So they go ahead and send you to get some additional help. Or if you are supporting a child or a family member who has been diagnosed with a condition affecting their mental health. So that one I really love, because I feel like a lot of people don't really know that you can go to therapy to get help to help you better understand and have a relationship with your spouse who has a mental health disorder, or your kid who has a mental health disorder. Like, I don't know if people are utilizing that aspect of it enough. I think a lot of people think that we have to have depression or bipolar disorder or autism or whatever. We have to have something, and that's what takes us to therapy. But really, it's so many different things. There's so many more reasons than just those 4 that I listed as to why somebody would seek therapy. And we need to talk about those more. We need to make more awareness around this so people can be like, oh my God, I can go get help with this. Like, I don't have to do this alone. Of course you don't have to do this alone, y'all. So, what are some of the elements of therapy? Let's talk about that real quick. So the same webpage that I'm talking about on the National Institute of Mental Health, which NIMH, is there like a way to pronounce that acronym? If so, please let me know, because I utilize this webpage a lot, but I don't like saying NIMH because that feels weird. So I say the whole word, which is long. But anyways, we're getting sidetracked. So they say that often the type of psychotherapy treatment is tailored to the specific disorder that a patient has been diagnosed with. Again, that goes back to what I was just saying. But for example, the treatment approach for someone who has obsessive compulsive disorder would most likely be a different approach than that for somebody who has bipolar disorder. So therapists may use one primary approach or incorporate different elements from multiple approaches depending on their training, the disorder being treated, and the needs of the person receiving treatment. So these elements of therapy can include helping the person to identify ways to cope with stress and develop problem-solving strategies, examine interactions with others, and teach social and communication skills, which I do think that is super, super important, especially for those of us who grew up in a household where we didn't have parents teaching us those. Our parents didn't know these, so we didn't learn these. So now we're learning through therapy. And so again, I'm like getting ahead of myself so much. This is so hard, y'all. So sorry, let me go back to being on track. So therapy can also help you to learn how to apply mindfulness and relaxation techniques, such as in meditation and breathing exercises, which I've talked about before. It can help you track emotions and behaviors to raise awareness of the impact on each other. Use supportive counseling to explore troubling issues and receive emotional support. And create a safety plan to help people with thoughts of self-harm or suicide to help recognize warning signs and use coping strategies such as contacting friends, family, or emergency personnel. So that is very brief gist of why we would go to therapy and what therapy can do for us. Now, there's a lot more to it than just that. And lucky for you, we're going to go over my entire 12.5 years of therapy. We're going to keep it brief, though. We're going to stick with the meat and potatoes, the good stuff. And I'm going to kind of walk you through what therapy was for me, what it wasn't for me, and what I learned on how to make therapy work for me. Because that's the thing, y'all. You cannot just show up to therapy and talk to your therapist and just expect everything's going to be okay. Like, you can't just do that. There are things that you have to do yourself as the client sitting there. That is your job. The therapist is there to guide you through life and to guide you in ways that you need, but you have to do the work yourself. And again, I'm about to get ahead of myself, so let's go ahead and just start with my journey. And so that way you guys can get a better idea of what the hell to expect if you have never seen a therapist before, but maybe you're at a point in your life where you're considering this as an option, which I'm going to just say this right now. I think everybody could benefit from a therapist. I know that therapy is expensive and that not everybody can afford it. Totally understand that. I'll talk a little bit more later about my issues with that as well. But yeah, if you can afford it and you feel like you need some extra help, like therapy, definitely, I strongly recommend. Strongly. So my journey all started when I ran away from home for the third time. So back then, I was a senior in high school, and it was the beginning of the spring semester. Life was horrible at home. Like, it was an absolute nightmare, and I needed to escape. And there was this boy that I had met at a party weeks before, and he was 21 at the time. So I asked him if I could just stay with him for the weekend. So he said yes. He didn't know I was planning on, quote, running away, but I packed up a bag, bunch of clothes. I had a work shift on Thursday. I went to that. And then after work shift, I turned off my phone. This was 2012. This is a long time ago. So back then, I think I had an iPhone. I don't even know if we were using Apple Maps to get around everywhere those days. I really don't remember. But what I do know is that I don't know that I had a tracking device on my phone, but I didn't even want to risk things. I didn't want my parents calling me, texting me, trying to find me. So I turned my phone off and I went to this guy's house. And he lived out in the middle of like nowhere. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Danbury, Texas. Some of y'all who live in my hometown might or have lived there. You might know about Danbury, but it was like way the fuck out there, like in the boonies in Danbury, not even like the city area of it. So because I had turned 18 on Christmas Day, which was a week or two before, I just assumed that I could leave like this and that nobody could come looking for me because I was legally an adult. Boy, was I wrong. Oh my God, I was wrong. Again, I grew up in Texas, so that might play a part in this, but let's just keep going. So, long story short, I was only gone for one night, and the local sheriff office, or like the local sheriff's officers, whatever, they found me the very next morning, and they brought my mom and the preacher of the church that we attended because she also worked there at the time. And y'all, this was a Friday. Like, I was skipping school. That was my plan, to skip school and just hide out at this dude's house all weekend. I was 18. I did not think this shit through very well. I should have done this on a Friday. Because here's the deal is in Texas, even if you're 18, if you are still in high school, you are still like, you're considered, I don't know if it's like, it's not a warden of the state, but like, you're not allowed to run away from home like this. Now, if I had already graduated and I was 18 and I chose to run off like this, cops couldn't do shit. They couldn't bring my ass back home. But I was being truant from school because I was skipping school on Friday. And because of that, they were able to go out and search for me and blah, blah, blah. And oh God, it was a whole thing. I can remember this so clearly. I joke that I have the memory of a hathi or an elephant, but I do. Like, I have such a vivid memory. And I can distinctly remember what it was like for these sheriffs to show up. The dude who was there, he fucking bolted, which I don't blame him because he was 21 and probably could have gotten in a lot of trouble. I don't know. So I got in the car. My mom was being super dramatic. And, oh, it was so embarrassing. It was so fucking embarrassing. So when I got home, my parents, they had already decided that I was the problem. That it was bad of me to do this. I was a bad kid, whatever they thought. And so they tried to force me to tell them shit when I got home, and I just refused. I was not going to talk to them. So now that I'm an adult, I understand that the way that they approached all of this was wrong. I truly believe that they approached this the wrong way because they pointed fingers at me. She's the problem. She did this. She ran away. She's a bad kid, blah, blah, blah. Whereas a true emotionally, it's not emotionally intelligent, but I guess emotionally mature adult would sit there and say, why the fuck did my kid run away? Like, what is happening to where they felt like they couldn't be here at home with me, that they wanted to escape? Truly, like, I wish my parents would have considered the situation like that, but they didn't. They just made me out to be the bad kid. And now I'm labeled the bad kid with problems with bipolar 2 disorder. Whatever else you want to throw on my name to add shame to me is what happened. So because of all of that, they forced me to go to therapy. Since I wouldn't talk to them, they're like, fuck it, we're going to make you talk to this stranger. So that is when Chelsea walked into my life. So Chelsea is a doctor now. I really should call her Dr. Chelsea. I joked. I told her I would, and I totally forgot. But most licensed therapists, y'all, they don't actually have doctorate degrees. So you don't call them, Dr. So-and-so like you would when you go to a doctor. Or if you go see a psychiatrist, those are doctors. So they're Dr. whoever. Therapists, it doesn't work like that. So therapists, they're not all obtaining doctorate degrees, so most of them you just call them by their first name, which I think also probably has a lot to do with a trust and building a relationship. It just feels better when I'm calling her by her first name and she calls me that, I guess. I don't know. But I remember hating it so much. She was up in Houston. I lived in Lake Jackson. It was an hour away. My parents would pick me up from school on Mondays and drive me an hour to Houston to go sit in this room and talk to this stranger I've never met before, and I'm supposed to tell her about my fucking life? Are you kidding me? What's worse, though, is that they were on the other side of the wall, sitting in the little waiting area. So I was always terrified that they could either A, hear through the walls and hear what was going on, or B, even worse, I thought that she was going to tell them what I was telling her, which, especially because I was 18, that was never going to be the case. And to be honest, because I didn't do therapy, as a kid, I don't know what the relationship, what they can tell parents. I feel like there's probably boundaries on that. Maybe if it's only, I don't know. I'm not even going to speculate. I'm going to let you guys look that up if you need to. But for me, that never would have been a problem, but I just assumed it. I didn't know her. I didn't trust her. I had really bad trust issues at the time for obvious reasons, especially if you've heard any of these podcast episodes previously. But I do know that recently, like within the last year, she told me that she remembers when I came into her office for the first time and when I became her patient 12 and a half years ago. and how I was just so hurting and I had zero tools. I didn't know how to manage any of my emotions. I didn't know how to like properly handle some social things, and I was a mess. I was a total mess, and I'm going to tear up now. Of course I am. But she just told me that how helpless I was and how I was there and I was just so lost, and how she wanted to help me so bad. But y'all, those first 5.5 years of therapy with her could probably be considered the biggest waste of time. Because when I would talk to her about things, I would lie. I used to lie a lot because I was so scared that she was going to go back and tell my parents. Because, guys, for 5.5 years, my parents forced me to be in therapy with Chelsea. Y'all, I moved out of my parents' house 9 months after I first started seeing Chelsea. I started seeing her in January of 2012. I was out of their home by October of 2012. But you know what? In order for me to be able to move out of my fucking parents' house as a graduated senior, 18-year-old, I'm an adult. I should be allowed to make my own choices. But one of the reasons I was going to be allowed to move out into my own apartment was that I had to keep going to therapy every single week. They were going to keep paying for it. At this point, by summer, I believe they allowed me to start driving myself, that they no longer drove me anymore. They started to trust me again. But still, once a week, I would have to drive up to Houston. They paid for it, of course, because they were forcing me to do it. But they forced me to do this for 5.5 years. 5.5 years. And in that 5.5 years, I lied to my therapist. I didn't listen to any of the advice she gave, any homework assignments that she gave me, which we'll talk about some of that later. Maybe she said, hey, listen to this podcast episode. This will help. Go watch this YouTube video. Read this book. Psh, I didn't do any of that shit. And she also was telling me hey, maybe chill out on the drinking, find ways to exercise, try to eat healthy. Didn't listen to any of that shit. I literally didn't listen to anything that she told me to do because I wasn't there because I wanted to be there. I was there to make mom and dad happy so they would leave me the fuck alone. Even though I'd already moved out of their house, y'all. I still can't believe I complied with that for so long. The level of control that they had over me was wild. Anyways, Chelsea probably hated our sessions because they got nowhere. I didn't improve whatsoever at all. Nothing good happened with me during these because I wasn't listening. I wasn't taking this seriously. But, at least she was making good, consistent income. Because I did show up. I always showed up like I was supposed to. Sometimes I was late. I rarely canceled or rescheduled last moment, any of that stuff. So, yeah, at least she got that. But then something happened and all of this changed. So Hurricane Harvey hit Houston in 2017. Just to backtrack a little bit, I moved up here in 2014. So again, still attending therapy sessions. It's easier now because it's closer by because I live in Houston. It's in Houston. But when Harvey hit in 2017, I thankfully was okay. The place I lived was okay. I didn't have any flooding problems. But I got into a car accident, and long story short, because that's a story for another day, my car was totaled. And the car that I had was my mom's old car, so it had already been paid off, and it had been given to me because I've had lots of history with car problems in the past. But I really needed a new car. You can't live in Houston without having a car. You just can't get around easily. The public transportation is trash. And so my parents always refused to co-sign on loans for things like cars, student loans, whatever. They refused to do that. But my credit score was trash. So I was trying to get a car through Hertz. So if y'all don't know this, Hertz and Enterprise, they sell their fleet cars. As soon as they hit the 30,000 mile warranty and that's up, they sell those. Y'all, that is one of the best ways to buy to buy a used car. They're usually about a year old, sometimes a little older, but usually about a year. They are in excellent condition because they are taken to get serviced every single time they are brought back in from somebody renting them. And for me, I was like, okay, a basic car used from Hertz, it was like $10,000, y'all. It like mind blowing. Again, this was years ago, but it is still a good option if you ever need to look into something like that. So I was denied getting the car because I had bad credit back then. So shit, what am I going to do? So luckily at the time, I did have quite a bit of savings. I had a pretty chunk of change in my savings account. I worked 2 jobs for a long time and saved up a ton of money. So the bad thing was it was not enough to pay for it in full. So what did I do? I called on my mom and I was like, hey, I can almost pay for this. I need some extra money. And so she helped me out. She sent it over. I wrote the check, drove away the car. She was reluctant about it, but she did it. And that was that. So when my dad found out, he decided that I needed to be punished because he didn't agree with this. He was angry. He was upset. And he probably wouldn't have helped me out if mom would have called him first. So, because I was not living under their roof anymore, how the hell is he going to punish me? The only thing that he could think of was to stop funding my therapy sessions, which I could not afford on my own. Y'all, back then, she would charge $120 an hour or a session, which is 50 minutes. Now she charges more. Talk about that later. But, like, I couldn't afford that. That's like almost $500 a month on therapy. I was a server. I was waiting tables. And I was also, I think at the time, I was also working at an eye doctor place. That's right. I was eye doctor and waiting tables, and I was not making enough money to be able to throw $500 at therapy every month. With the lifestyle I had at the time, which was a lot of going out, eating out, drinking, all of those things. So, trigger warning. So, guys, for about a minute, if you need to fast forward, I'm going to talk about some suicidal thoughts that occurred in my life. So, please fast forward a full minute if you need to. No hard feelings. But I remember being so upset when they told me that they weren't going to pay for therapy anymore. I called Chelsea. I was crying, and I told her that my parents were taking away therapy and then I needed to cancel all of my future appointments because I couldn't afford to come on my own. And it was so devastating because I was literally at rock bottom in my life. And going to therapy once a week was really the only safe space I had to be able to not feel any judgment and kind of talk about all the things that were bringing me down. So because of this, I literally not too long after this, I started to Google things about like how I could move forward with suicide. Like that's how bad it was, y'all. I was in so much distraught and emotional pain. I had just broken up with a boyfriend that I was living with at the time. It was rock bottom in my life. So thankfully, Google did not give me any of the answers, and it actually instead gave me the suicide prevention hotline every time I tried to search something, which, well played, Google. That was really good of you. So that pissed me off in the moment, but obviously it was for the best because I didn't go through with anything, and I'm here today to share this painful story with you guys. Yeah, I try not to think about that time in my life too much because it was really, really, really hard. So life moved on. I got a new job. Things were looking better, but life was still rough for me. I have bipolar disorder. I don't know how to manage my emotions back at this time, and it's just wreaking havoc in all different places in my life. So in December of 2018, I hit yet another really, really hard bump in the road in life, and I felt so lost, and I needed help. So I called up therapy. I called up Chelsea, my old therapist, and I asked to schedule an appointment. I remember it was after I ran a 5K for the first time. I was sitting in my car, and I was crying. I was just so beaten down and broken, and I was like, calling her crying, I really need to schedule an appointment whenever, we can make it work, but as soon as possible. So I finally get in, and It was our first session in almost a year and a half. And so I told her, I was like, I will do anything that you tell me to do, but I just need to feel better. Like, I need my life to be different. I was hurting so bad, and I was desperate for change. Desperate for change, but I didn't know how to do it. I had no idea what I needed to do to make life not so shitty. So this was a complete turning point in my life, y'all. And right now, I want you to pay really, really close attention to everything I say moving forward because I really want therapy to work for you guys. And if you guys would take into consideration some of the things that I did the second round, you guys might have a much more, enlightening and helpful experience from the get-go than I did. And that's one of the things I kind of regret, but I am really glad that I was forced to go, because then when I was really ready and willing to do the work and to have therapy work for me, I had someone to go to that I trusted and I knew and that was able to work with me financially. So that ended up being such a blessing. She knew that I couldn't afford very much, and so she has what was called a sliding scale. And she put me on that to where I didn't have to pay as much, because I was someone who couldn't afford it, but who really needed it and who was willing to come in and do the things and show up and listen to her. And so I'm forever grateful for that, because y'all, like $120 a week on therapy, that's like more than groceries I was spending back then as a single person living by myself. That's expensive. So what I did differently when I started to go to therapy on my own accord was that I listened to all advice that she gave, and I actively found ways to implement these things into my life, which huge difference than before. So any books, podcasts, TED Talks, articles, anything that Chelsea recommended for me, I made sure that I had found the time to absorb the content before our next session. If she would say, hey, watch this TED Talk, I would immediately go home and watch that TED Talk. And I would take these things into consideration. And real quick, I want to throw in that she recommended Brene Brown's books to me, and she recommended them in a specific order. And that is why I've written an article. Brene Brown's books ranked in order of most helpful, because I literally have read all of them because of her. So I'm going to put that link to my article about this in the show notes. But Brene Brown changed my life, and that was thanks to my therapist. I wouldn't have found her on my own. So little nugget right there. So I also would ask her questions, and I would listen to the answers, even if it was something that I would rather not hear. So let's say I would start to ask, like, okay, but I did this, so like, why are they acting like this? I don't think it's that big of a deal. And she would come back and say, well, they may have reacted that way because XYZ. And maybe I didn't want to hear that. Maybe I didn't want to believe that my behavior was harmful to someone else, even though I didn't mean it to be harmful. So that was something that was hard pill to swallow, but it's something that I started to do actively. And that actually leads into the next thing I wrote down, which is I began to take responsibility for my own actions and behaviors. And not just that, is that I worked with her to find ways to change those. And that is a process in itself, y'all. That is a process. But that is something that I have actively worked on over the years, and I have gotten better with time, but it's part of therapy. It's part of it. So speaking of, let's go ahead and move in on some tips for how to get the most out of therapy. So Talkspace.com has an amazing article titled How to Get the Most Out of Therapy. The irony. It's written by Jill E. Dano and clinically reviewed by Elizabeth Cohen, both of which are LCSWs, which is like licensed counseling. Google the rest. So while this article has 15 different tips from these wonderful women, I am going to just talk about the ones that have worked best for me. So the rest you can find in the article, and the link to this article is in the show notes. But the first thing they say is to define what you want to get out of the sessions. If you can sit down and figure out what it is that you want to get help with, what you want to do better, what you want to change about your attitude or your behaviors or whatever you have it, get clear about that before you go in and talk to your therapist about that so that you guys can be on the same page and be aware and understanding of what we're trying to do here. Guys, if you can tell them what you're trying to do, they can better assist you to get to that goal. Otherwise, they're just going to do what they think is best. Stay focused on you. So this one is super important because I think a misconception with therapy is that you sit there and you go and you tell them about how, your best friend is being a bitch and you don't appreciate it and you just sit and whine and complain. And that's not at all what this is. We cannot control how anyone around us behaves. We can't control our parents. We can't control our kids. We cannot choose how anyone else behaves, reacts, or feels things. What we can do is focus on ourselves. We can control our actions. We can control our behaviors, and we can figure out how to control our emotions too. So a really big thing is when you go to therapy is to focus on, okay, well, I did this and this is how people reacted. Do I need to do something differently? Or should I have done something differently? Or whatever it have you, but that's what we need to focus on because the therapist can only help you because you are the person sitting there in front of them. So that is super, super important, y'all. So be open and be vulnerable. And I'm going to add, be honest, because when you lie to your therapist, it does no good. And that can be hard. It can be really hard to open up and be vulnerable with a stranger. I totally get that. And I'm sure therapists are probably used to that. They're probably used to having to get people to warm up to them before they can actually get to the good stuff and start to help them. But guys, that's what they're there for. They want to help you. So they need to know certain things about you so they can figure out how to better help you. So keep that in mind. So take notes is a big one too. If they say, hey, check out this article, write it down. Go read this book, write it down. Maybe try doing this exercise, whatever they're telling you guys. If they're recommending you try something, write it down, take notes, and take it seriously. That leads into the next one, to do your homework between sessions. So I did not do that those first 5.5 years, but ever since then, I have definitely done that. I do my homework. I do what she asks of me because she's asking for a reason. She's not telling me to go read Brene Brown's Rising Strong book for no reason. Like, she's got a reason for it, and it's probably a good one. So you should listen, and you should be active and participate because you're going to be missing out on a lot and wasting a lot of time if you don't. Trust me from experience. Be patient and trust the process, which is probably one of the hardest ones because you can't just go to therapy once and everything is better. It takes time. It takes work. And this is something that you need to be consistent about and go back time and time again. Don't miss your scheduled appointments. Go once a week, once a month, whatever they recommend for you, and take it seriously. Because, guys, just like exercise and losing weight, you can't just exercise once and eat a carrot stick and then expect to lose 20 pounds. Like, it takes work to transform and to, make these habits or make these things into habits. That's the same with therapy. You have to go and you have to do the work and you have to be consistent because if you're trying to change things about yourself to make your life better, to make it easier, to make it less stressful, whatever they recommend, you've got to be able to do it and you've got to try. You've got to try consistently until it's no longer a forcible thing. It just becomes a habit. These are things that I have done in therapy. And guys, that is why distressed to joyful is the thing. Y'all, rock bottom to where I am now, therapy has really been the biggest key as to how I've gotten here. Because she led me to the tools I needed to build the beautiful, happy Bailey I am today. Which is totally different from that Bailey in 2017. If y'all met that old Bailey, I really hope that you've had a chance to meet the new one because I'm new and improved and I just have a much more fulfilling life now because of it. So there you have it, folks. That is my journey with therapy. That is all that I have for you today. But I really hope that this episode has been enlightening for you, and that by me choosing to openly talk about my experience in therapy, I hope that you guys have found that helpful. And also, I really, really hope that if you do choose to seek out therapy, that you will consider those tips that I provided from the article. Because, guys, if you go to therapy, I really want it to work for you, and I don't want you to waste the time like I did, because that was so much time and money down the drain. And had I known these things ahead of time, maybe I could have had an easier life. Maybe it wouldn't have taken, I don't know. 5.5 years, maybe I could have had a much happier time before 2017. Maybe I wouldn't have hit rock bottom had I actually listened and learned and implemented and been actively a part of the therapy instead of just showing up. I am going to skip over win of the week this time. I will get you guys on next episode. I've got a couple I'll share with you that are really, really fun. But this episode went a bit longer than I was expecting. So, until next time, take it easy, stay grateful, and be joyful. Bye! Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Distressed to Joyful Bailey's Way. Head on over to whatisheybellsdoing.com to find the resources mentioned throughout this episode. Be sure to follow the show on Instagram at distressed2joyful_Bailey's Way and on Facebook at Distressed to Joyful Bailey's Way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform or write a review on Audible or Apple Podcasts. Lastly, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with new episode releases. Until next time, take it easy, stay grateful, and be joyful. Bye!